I don't think people are afraid of death, observed a 30-year-old man dying of cancer in Anatoly Broyan's memoir, Intoxicated by My Illness, and other writings. What they are afraid of is the incompleteness of their life. Welcome to Voices of the Completed Life podcast. My name is Lynn, Barger, Elliott, and this month we are offering a special series called Gifts of the Completed Life, reflections on grief, unfinished business, and open windows. Today we welcome Mark Barger Elliott, Executive Director, to our conversation. Glad you're here, Mark.
Wonderful to be here, thanks.
In this episode, we're considering how, along with grief, the topic of our previous podcast, unfinished business can also be a gift. A gift that prompts us, inspires us, helps us to find ways to focus our attention on what might be incomplete in our lives. Mark, you interviewed Rupert Callender, a British undertaker, as part of our fall conference a few weeks ago. He was the one who brought this idea to our attention.
Yeah, Rupert had this poignant observation. He said in helping people to say goodbye to loved ones, to begin to express their grief, he had become, as he put it in the interview, very aware of the fragility of life and also of what he called unfinished business in his life.
You and I have talked about how the name and the concept of the completed life implies that at times we might have a sense that our lives are incomplete.
Yeah, exactly. Recently, I came across the work of Hilda Vinge. She's a professor of philosophy in Norway. And in her work, she helpfully explains that Aristotle was actually one of the first to bring forward this idea of a completed life. Aristotle's observation, and scholars, well, they differ on this somewhat, but one way to view a completed life, according to him, is in terms of time. Meaning, on the one hand, we can measure our lives by our lifetime. That when we die, our life is complete, full stop, as the British say. So, a definition of a completed life is when it ends. But Vinge writes how Aristotle also said we can have complete moments throughout our lives. That a complete life can have a sequence of moments of happiness, for example, or meaning or awe that feel full and complete in and of themselves.
That's interesting. In our fall conference, we had a few other people who mentioned the same idea. The idea of attending to what might feel unfinished in our lives. And that paying attention to noticing those aspects of our lives can create moments of completeness.
Yeah, that's the idea.
That reminds me of The Bucket List, that movie where Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson both have that terminal diagnosis. From their hospital beds, they create a bucket list and then decide to leave the hospital and to check off those items on that list. Before they died, they wanted to do things like witness something majestic, to help a complete stranger.
My freshman philosophy professor assigned this exercise and called it a bucket list. We were supposed to make a list of all the things we wanted to do in our lives before we kicked the bucket. Cutesy. Pointless now. We could do this. We should do this.
Yeah, that's precisely one way to look at it. That what is unfinished is perhaps something we've not yet set time aside to do or committed to do or attempted to do. Now, of course, I suspect a danger here is we can think of a bucket list then as having to be something great and grand and majestic, like, I don't know, like swimming with dolphins in Cozumel or parachuting over the Serengeti, although I don't think that's a thing. But it could be as simple as maybe setting time aside to learn to play the banjo, something you've always wanted to do.
I know you've talked about wanting to learn how to bake a cheesecake.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I even brought that special cheesecake pan one day, but I never actually learned how to do it.
Unfinished business.
Well, that's an example.
So the idea is to do something you've always wanted to try but haven't done yet. And by doing it, you complete something?
Yes, that's one way of interpreting Aristotle.
And it can create complete moments of happiness or meaning.
That's the idea.
Now, I remember another person you interviewed during our conference, Jennifer Senior. She offered a different aspect of unfinished business as something beyond experiencing something majestic or learning how to make cheesecake. She talked about unfinished business in the realm of relationships.
I think a completed life means making sure that every single relationship you have is, if it's broken, that it's broken in a way that's okay. And if it's in a weak state, to shore it up, fill it in.
I think here Jennifer Senior helpfully is pointing us towards the importance of unfinished business in our relationships. And it's challenging and maybe inspiring when she says, if something in a relationship is in a weak state, to shore it up or to fill it in, as she puts it.
And that can be a gift of what we're calling unfinished business. You decide to call someone you haven't spoken to in years. You engage in a difficult conversation that perhaps or maybe doesn't lead to forgiveness and new understanding.
But you take the chance. Exactly. You notice what feels unfinished and tend to that area or areas of your life.
I'd like to pivot now to another aspect of this concept of the gift of unfinished business. And that is maybe what Aristotle was talking about in regards to a completed life being a life that ultimately ends.
Mm-hmm.
In my interview with Anita Hannig, the author of The Day We Die, I asked her if there were habits or tendencies that she observed in people who live and die well.
So the people, I can mostly speak to people whom I've met in the course of my work on assisted dying. But I think what united all of them is that they had come to a real space of acceptance about their mortality. They were no longer in denial about what was coming. And they really looked to their own passing with a sense of completion. And what I mean by that is that they no longer really had the sense that they had to travel to other countries or they had to finish this book or scale this mountain or do this or this. They all had kind of the sense of, I've done a lot of really cool things in my life. And and a lot of them actually at the time said, I wish I were here to witness the next election because they were so curious what would happen. But they had really, and of course they had regrets, they had things that they would have done differently, but they currently really didn't have urging, pressing projects anymore. They were leaving that to the next generation. And many of us associate this moment with the word terminal. We used it earlier, in the discussion. But in my experience, these endings were also a form of liberation. What I mean by that is that those people were looking towards an unknown horizon. And it takes real courage to tread a path that, you don't know what's going to be on the other side, and to make quote unquote friends with death. But that's what they were doing. And I think that's a powerful message to think about. Okay, so much of our lives, we think about quantity. We think about, oh, is this person going to live to 100, 110? Or we celebrate anniversaries, or it's so much in the numbers. But really, at the end of the day, they were just interested, like the people that I worked with were like, okay, like realistically, what is my quality right now? How can I make the most out of this quality that I have, and not be obsessed about how much longer I'll be here, but how I'm going to be here? And I have to say, there's a real grace in kind of stemming this cultural tide towards longer, longer, better, and wanting to do more and optimize our lives, and just say, you know what, okay, I'm done. I'm complete. I look at my life, and I'm sure there are things I would do differently, but I no longer will get to, and that's okay.
I think our list of things we haven't done can keep us focused. They can give us purpose each new morning. But there comes a day, Hannig talked about this in her experiences, there comes a day with the dying when it's okay, and maybe even necessary, to say, I've done enough. It's important to pay attention to what might be unfinished, in other words. But as people who make mistakes, who get lost along the way, who grapple with challenges that are beyond our ability to manage, at some point, it's okay to say, I've done enough. My life is complete enough.
I think that's exactly right. And now my focus, so to speak, if I hear you right, isn't the past as it relates to the future, that kind of unfinished business. But what you're talking about is the present as it now relates to my death. That this is my focus now, and by necessity or choice, I will leave my unfinished business undone.
Like Aristotle said, and a life is complete when it is no longer a life.
Yeah, and that is a gift, I believe, to come to see our life as complete at the time of our death.
Didn't Rupert Callender say something like that?
Yeah, he alluded to the fact that in his work as an undertaker, or what we might call a funeral director, he's seen how at any age, a life that dies is complete. There may be, of course, untapped potential, as he put it, or grief, but every life is complete when that person dies.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you to our listeners for joining us for the Gifts of the Completed Life, a special series of Voices of the Completed Life. Join us next week as we consider the gift of open windows, as heard through the words of our fall conference speakers. To listen to the full interviews of Rupert Callender, Anita Hannig, and Jennifer Senior, please go to the Events tab on the homepage of CompletedLife.org and scroll down to the 4th Annual Fall Conference. On the same website, you can also find other episodes of Voices of the Completed Life by going to the Education tab. Thank you for joining us here at the Completed Life Initiative, We love to hear from you. Please email us your reflections and comments at info@completedlife.org.